Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Bright Lights. I'm your host, Lacy Johnson. Each week, we bring you information and feature guests to help uh, give some light to some of the things and achievement that they've done and to share lights with you on what they've done and how they've done it. And we have a very exciting guest this evening, and I'll be introducing her shortly here. But before I go on, I do realize, and as I explained the last time, that we are in the Twin Cities area, and we have been kind of the center of the news and media world for the past few weeks, and especially yesterday and part of today. And I'll be remiss if I did not say something about that. And I'll just repeat some of the things messages I sent out yesterday. First of all, I think it's great that we can finally turn to healing our families, our community, and the city of Minneapolis. I hope we can get down to that. Secondly, it's a challenge today, but we must do it. We must remind ourselves that there's a common humanity among us, and we must focus less on our differences, and we must stop letting people drive wedges between us as people and decent human beings. And then the third thing I'll say on that is that I hope we can go forward while we're healing and start rebuilding this city and everything that's been torn down and affected in a negative way in a bigger and better manner. And now, not to trivialize it, but on a personal side, I got a little grandson I tell everybody about, little Aiden Prince, and he's the bright light of my heart. But me and my wife, Betty, we were talking about taking him to the zoo sometime pretty soon. So he loves to look out our patio door at squirrels and crows and, as he say, rabbits. And I'm just looking forward to introducing him to lions and tigers and bears and snakes and pretty birds and dolphins and all kinds of things at the zoo. But my wife said to me, she said, well, they said, we better wait until after the trial is over and see what's going to happen, because we don't want to get out there and get in the middle of things. So what I'm trying to say is that now that everything is over, I'm going to be purchasing zoo tickets, and I'm going to look forward to taking my little grandson to the zoo for the first time. Okay, having said that, let's get started with everything. Today's guest is Martha Njolomole. I hope I got that right. I'm going to have her correct me when she gets on. Martha is an economist with the American experience, and she's had a lot of background. She's very, very involved. And so, hi, Martha. How are you doing?
Hi, Lacy. Good evening. Thank you for having me.
Okay, first thing you need to do, Martha, is get me out of trouble with my audience here and pronounce your last name for me. And I practice it a little bit, believe it or not.
Yeah, so it's Njolomole.
Njolomole. Okay, the Njolomole. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, that's pretty good.
Yeah. Welcome to the Bright Lights. You are an economist, correct?
Yes.
Yes. And I understand. Why don't you, without leading the audience or leading you, tell us a little bit about your childhood, where you're from, and growing up, and how all that influenced you as you went through life.
Yeah, so I am from Malawi. It's a small country in Southeast Africa. It's about 80 million people, so like about four times the size of Minnesota population-wise. So I grew up in an area that could best be described as like suburban, rural. So you have a lot of people farming and also some people doing businesses. So as far as I know, from what my relatives tell me, so my great grandparents came from somewhere and then they settled around that area. So in the past, I guess they used to have big plots of land for farming, but as times went on, so those plots became smaller and smaller. So most of my family practiced small scale farming. So one thing that actually stuck with me during those times was that we had a president a while back that introduced this subsidy program whereby they would give coupons to farmers to buy fertilizer.
Uh-huh.
When you actually convey the currency, the Malawian currency, to US dollars, it's probably like $3, $4. So that's like very little money when in
Mm-hmm.
perspective. But that just points to how poor people are, like, in that region. So that was one of the things that stuck with me about how, most of the people around me had low incomes. And then the second thing that I also noticed is that I was very curious, so that I'll read pieces of newspapers. I used to listen to the radio a lot, so
Mm-hmm.
you'd hear stories about, Malawi got financial aid from the US or the UK. Of course, then I had no idea of, how developed most of these countries were. So I always wondered, why are we so poor? People around me, or most of them are poor. Our country is poor. So what can I do, to contribute? But
Mm-hmm.
because the government was such a big part of Malawi, my idea was that I was going to study economics and then come back and work in the government. But then I studied economics here. I figured non-profit is the way to go. So that's what brought me here today.
Oh,
uh,
okay.
yes.
Uh, Good. Now, most countries in Africa, I think I'm right about this, so a lot of them are resource rich,
Hmm.
even though the people are generally not so well off, and there's very seldom a large middle class. Is that something similar to the way it is in Malawi? And what type of resources natural resources and things do they have that could serve as the foundation for generating wealth for more people in that country?
I cannot say for sure that that's the case with Malawi. Of
Hmm.
course, I've heard some things about bauxite deposits and some sort of rare minerals and like oil in the lake. But in as far as they're there, I don't think they're like huge deposits as most countries like Zimbabwe or South Africa. I think the issues lie deep with like the institutions, the
Right.
political institutions, lack of freedom, and things of that nature. Uh,
Okay. Now, you mentioned that you developed these passion and interests growing up and you wanted to get into economics. How old were you when you left Malawi?
So I was 17 actually. So that was
Okay.
2013. That's when I started my undergraduate program in economics at Troy University. So
Okay.
it's pretty.
Well, okay. Well, I should share that my wife of 34 years is from Alabama, and I'm very familiar with that area down there. How was it going to school in Troy? Did you find it somewhat of a culture shock, or were you able to move in and just join right in with the people down there as far as their culture and what they like to eat, what they like to do, the music, etc.? How was it adjusting to coming to America and specifically going to Troy University in Alabama?
Yeah, I think it was very different just culturally. I think it could have been a shock, whichever area of the United
Right,
States that
right,
I went. The food is different. People address you differently. There's a bit of like a social distance type of thing in Malawi. You're expected to respect your elders. You bow when you talk. It's things like that I didn't find here, and you can address people older than you by their first name. So that was one thing that struck me.
okay,
But one of the biggest things actually that I found very hard to get used to was this idea of individualism. In Malawi, most we're very very communal. So weddings are like a community affair. People don't get invited to weddings. People don't send out invitations. If there's a wedding, everybody goes.
right, right, right.
Yeah, funerals are like that. You have this huge procession marching through the area to the graveyard. So when I came here, the idea of individualism sounded kind of selfish. So
Right.
it took me a while to get used to it. But and I understood later on, it's just differences. And no one culture is better than the other. All of those exist because of the surrounding institutions. In Malawi, you have to be close like that because it acts sort of like an enforcement mechanism for bad behavior.
Hmm.
If you
Hmm.
have somebody that doesn't like to pay their loans, once everybody hears about it, they're not lending them money. So that's one way you get to enforce good behavior. But here you have all these courts and the police, and the system is very well developed. So yeah, it took a little to get used to, but I'll
Okay.
go through the process. Yeah.
Well, just so you know, and it's my show and I can make commentary when I interject commentary when I want to. There
Okay.
was a time when we were respectful of our elders and very respectful. And I grew up in during the same type of culture where, and I tell a lot of people, and I don't want to overstate it, I don't want to get into hyperbole, but elders and parents were like gods on earth almost. Uh, and I'm kind of like you too. That was one of the two most surprising things I ran into when I came to Minnesota. That there was actually kids who didn't like their parents and walked away from, had ran away from home. That was just such a shock to me. And then just an aside, and I'll get back to our interview, the fact that fighting could be a verbal thing. I was originally confused. They had a fight, and a lot of times they meant it was just a verbal thing. And I'm like, and so those are the two little small things that I had to get used to when I moved here. Is there any particular? Let's talk a little bit about the food down there. Is there any particular dish that you had for the first time? You just said, "Hey, where has this been all of my life?"
Ah, it was more of, I guess, the opposite. Like, why am I eating this? I can't say I remember anything that well, I found grits very surprising. The whole concept was
Oh, greens?
not grits.
Oh, grits. Oh, yeah, right. Okay, grits. Okay, gotcha. I can
Yeah, and
understand
the
that.
fact that you eat them with catfish, I couldn't get around the whole idea. And iced tea was also strange because most African places you drink tea while it's hot, and you always have sugar in it. So
Right.
yeah.
Well, and one last question on that area. What did you miss most about your country when you first came here to go to college at Troy University?
Um. Well, I would have said because I came from an area where everybody knew everybody. So my family actually, all of my whole extended family from my maternal side, we all live a walking distance from each other. So
Right, right.
I get to see all my great grandparents, all my uncles and aunts, all of them. So yeah, that it was hard to live in an area where that is like not the norm because most people just come to the school. Their families live all around the country, so
Yeah.
make it
Well,
sense.
you keep reminding me of my childhood too, where I grew up around all of my uncles and aunts and grandparents and great grandparents, and those days seem like they're gone. So let's get back to your growing up in Malawi. I understand that as part of that growth process, that you develop a passion for research into the social and economic conditions of disadvantaged communities. Uh, what did your research? Well, first of all, did you get a chance to do research once you got to Troy, and now that you're here, have you done research in that area?
Yeah, so my program at Troy was very general, so it was pretty much focused on just understanding how resources are allocated in an economy and what the base system is, what each type of system says, at least what each type of economic theory says. So I remember my master's economic research paper was on microfinance. Microfinance was one of the big steps that were taken to spur development in developing countries. So I did research on that, just pretty much analyzing why it didn't bring as much growth as it did, which I found that the issue was with the institutions. There's less economic freedom in those areas. So you have people that start businesses, but they don't have protection from the law, from the system of those businesses. And then you have people that have lands, but those lands are not registered,
Right.
and so the property rights are very uncertain. So people don't have a lot of incentives to develop and invest in those lands. So these are issues that are pretty much common in what economic research says. Is what leads to poverty and decline. It's like you tend to see this issue too when you look at the levels of freedom in between countries and how much they've grown actually. So I was looking at this data the other day on economic freedom rankings, by the Heritage Foundation. So
Mm-hmm.
the United States ranks like number 12 on freedom, which means it's one of the most free countries in the world. When it
Mm-hmm.
comes to their per capita incomes, it's also pretty high. So there's a very big correlation there. When you have lower taxes, when you have regulations that don't prevent people from working or people from starting businesses, you tend to see growth, and then you tend to see less poverty. So the issues that the ideas are the same. You have freedom, you have growth, and then you have less poverty. I think that's the general theory tends to hold in most areas.
That's a pretty good observation because for a lot of people, it's kind of counterintuitive. They think the more taxes that you put in, the more money people are going to have. And I think that's an excellent point. Even though our history has proven, whether you look at the JFK tax cut, any tax cuts, it generally leads to economic growth. But it's kind of intuitive to a lot of people. And to be honest with you, a lot of people in our media. You touched on the role of government. And I know, but before I go there, I need to remind people that Martha is, you can Google her and you will see her writings. And Martha, Martha, Njolomole. I get that. It's in. I can spell it. I was fourth grade spelling bee champion in this baking room, so I can still spell a little bit. Njolomole. Did I get that right, Martha?
So there is an LO after the JO.
Okay, you spell it
Hello.
for our audience then.
So the last name is NJOLOMO.
Okay,
Yes.
that's why I whispered none and I missed the spelling. Okay, so Google her and you'll have context, access to a lot of her writings. But I was going to ask, we have been talking about the role of government, and you mentioned that how the government in your country, what they did as protection and things like that, and providing for people. And I got the impression in reading that you see a different role for government as far as what it relates to its citizens, its people, and what's best for its people. Can you expound on that a little bit for me?
Yes, definitely. So it was very different in Malawi, because I went to a government school in primary school. I was selected to go to the University of Malawi, which is a government university. I went to, every time I got sick, I went to a government hospital. The government is the biggest employer in the Malawian economy. So I tended to see the government as a provider, and it didn't really bother me a bit. I thought that was as a normal thing. But once I get to learn about economics, and what really drives growth, I think now that government is better off just focusing on creating and enforcing laws, making sure that they are applied uniformly. They should focus on protecting ownership rights and just human rights in general. They should focus on enforcing contracts, whether it be but businesses, things of that sort. So I think as far as the government is set on just uh, promoting a stable and consistent operating environment economically or socially, the
Mhm.
private sector is more than capable of developing, of providing jobs and economic growth. So that is my dear right now.
Right. Okay. Okay. And you, like we've said a couple times before, you mastered in economics at Troy University, and I'm not economics subject matter expert by any stretch of the imagination, but I read a little bit about it, and I do know that there are different schools of economics. There's the philosophy of demand side economics versus supply side economics. There's Keynesian. There's the Chicago School of Economics, and in fact, if you see the list, that's a whole bunch of them. Personally, I'm just a little bit that I do know, and I stress a little bit that I do know. I'm kind of a convert of Milton Friedman. I just like his whole idea about freedom, and just like you said, the limited role for government and things like that. And I just really have been impressed with the Nobel laureate the late Nobel laureate Milton Friedman. But that's a long way of asking you: do you have any particular types of schools of economics that you are a proponent of, or is it a mesh of them? And I'll give you a chance to respond, Mark.
Yeah, so my program was very much Austrian
Oh, yeah.
oriented.
Okay.
So so I read a lot of Friedrich Hayek, Ludwig von Mises. So I think these are my biggest influences. So these are two people that were writing, for the most part, against socialism, or just the idea of planning an economy centrally. One of Hayek's most famous essays right now, the use of knowledge in society. I think that's one of the biggest articles why free markets are the best for allocating resources. So basically, what he said was that like me right now, if somebody asked me what do you think Lacy wants for dinner, I wouldn't be able to know, because his preferences are like not the same as mine, the same as everybody else outside. So people are making decisions based on those preferences, and then as they make those decisions, prices tend to change. If people are buying more oranges now, prices of oranges will go up, which will send a signal to farmers in, say, Florida, that people are buying more oranges. Maybe you should invest more in oranges. The same if people are buying less oranges, the opposite will happen. So there is no single person that knows, this is how many people like oranges, and this is how all these farmers should use all their resources to produce. So this is why the free market is best, because you have all these prices telling you this is what people want right now, and this is where you should invest all your resources. The same way that if you have two people working, having the same amount of salary, if you
Mhm.
raise their incomes, even at the same level, one of them would choose to, say, work more, because they have a higher wage now, so they value the more money. But the other one would choose to work less, because the money that they have now, they can substitute that for they can still consume at the same amount, but still have a lot of free time. They value the free time
Right,
more.
right, right. Hmm.
Well, yeah, you can't choose for everybody. Everybody has different preferences. They value things differently. That's why through the price system, you're able to coordinate all those decisions, and then you come together and you produce value for everybody. So that is pretty much the basic idea there. It's much more complex than I put
No,
it.
no, no, that's a good answer though. But and once again, before we go any further, I'm weaving in and out of here. Our interview, as far as the economics is concerned, what some of the people out in the audience may be wondering is what brought you to Minnesota, and was that right after you got your master's at Troy?
Yes, so I came to Minnesota in October of 2019. So that was a couple months after I graduated. So it was a little later, because I had an immigration thing that needed sorting out. But so I came here for the job, basically. So,
Now, who reached out to whom? How did you see? How were you made aware of this job to uh, apply for it in the first place? Yeah.
well, there's an online website. I forgot the name, but it's
Mhm.
it's where libertarian conservative think tanks post, their vacancies.
Okay.
So yeah, so I went on their website and I applied for the job. So
Oh, okay. Good. Good. I'm glad that they hired you too.
yeah.
Okay. So I do know also, Martha, that you have been writing on COVID and the impact that it has had on our public education system. Can you shed a little light on your thoughts in that area for me, please?
Yeah, it's very interesting and sort of sad to see, because a lot of things have happened with the school closures. So you had students being taken away from their their friends, being isolated from their friends. Kids' social systems are most exclusively built on the school system. And then besides that, you disrupt their routine. So
Right.
there was a lot of anxiety that came on with that, a lot of fear, loneliness. So the CDC actually, they produced a study last year. So they said that between March and October of 2020, the mental health visits that they had in the emergency departments, they were up by like 31%, among like kids aged 12 and 17. And then among kids aged 5 and 11, they were up by almost like a quarter, like 24%. So that's a pretty huge number, a pretty huge deal, because once these people get older, those type of illnesses tend to get worse. So that is also like a crisis that we've created in another crisis. And then there was the issue with learning loss. A lot of students had to go remote. So this issue was actually the worst among students of color and low-income students, because one, they were most likely to be in public schools, which means they were most likely to be learning remotely. And two, they are most likely to have parents that don't know how to use computers or don't know how to access online learning resources. Parents that can't fully support them as parents of, say, high income students. And also, in general, these people don't have the right resources, like computers, internet. So their learning losses were actually more signified than among high income students. A report by McKinsey, so this is a research group online, said, so this was June last year, they said that just closing school in the spring, so while students lost like 1 to 3 months of math, like in learning, but for students of color, that was 3 to 5 months. And if that closure went on to June, that loss was going to be like a year for students of color and just like 8 months for white students. And I think most people know that schools in Minnesota have been closed for way longer than that. So that's also like a big loss in learning. But this translates, in the future, this translates to loss in earnings, because people students are not accumulating skills right now. This means as they go on, they'll have a hard time even accumulating advanced skills. So they're losing money in the future, and just basically there's loss in GDP, and just it's all been just bad on a lot of ends. And it's also worse because when you look at the numbers, actually students don't have a high risk of contracting COVID, transmitting it, or even dying from it. So when you look at Minnesota right now, actually only two people between the ages of 1 and 19 have died from COVID. And between 0 and 29, the number is just 12. So the fatality rate, the infection fatality rate actually for young people is like 0.00 something. It's much different from the other people that have like a 30% rate risk of dying. The median age for COVID right now is like 84. The median age of death from COVID is 84. But there's been this damage on kids that shouldn't have happened in the first place. So.
Did I hear you correctly that the median age is 84?
Yes. So when you look at the numbers,
wow.
The median age of death is like 8. Yeah. So it's
okay. Yeah.
So I guess you
yeah. Well, here's the thing for our audience, and I think I remember my basic mathematics here. Median means that half the people are below that age and half of them are above that age.
Yes.
Yes,
so,
yes. Huh? That's surprising knowledge even for me. And you touched a little bit on the business, and could you touch a little bit more? Because in Minneapolis, and here's the thing. Well, a couple of things before we move on to business. You mentioned the impact on education and learning remotely, and the impact it has, especially on children of color. And what I've been saying to a lot of people along that line, there's already an educational achievement gap. Now you just blew it even further open, and it's going to make it even more difficult to catch up. And even I mentioned earlier that I have a little grandson. I could tell from him, and I even talked to his parent about you could see he was missing the socialization and being around his friends and stuff, and it was, and I think it was impacting his development as a child too. So that's a lot of things that we sacrifice. And I'll just say this, and I'll leave it alone. Is that there's always trade-offs that you have to make. And I'm the classic corporate guy with the risk management quadrant, where you look at the chances of it happening and the impact of it, and you make decisions based on that. I'm not so sure we did that this time around. So that's a good point that you make. What about, do you see the businesses coming back? Have there been any studies within Minnesota of the impact of COVID and even the looting and the rioting on small businesses, mainly small, no, just forget small businesses, period, here in Minnesota. What in the field of economist is being talked about as far as impact and what we see down the road? And is there any, can we ever get back to normal? Just touch on a few of those topics as it apply to businesses here in the Twin Cities and the struggles a lot of them have been having.
Yeah, so when we look at the numbers, actually, it was mostly like the service sector that was, heavily impacted.
Mm-hmm.
It was as they deemed it non-essential. So you had a lot of restaurants, hotels, movie theaters closing up. Well, they had all these social distancing rules that basically made it impossible for some of them to operate or even make a profit. So some were even, losing money while operating. And then I think the worst thing about the lockdown was the uncertainty of it. Because like in the winter, you had people installing all these heating systems outside because they figured if there's less space inside, we might as well take our customers outside. So during
Mm-hmm.
because it's the winter, they put out all these heating systems. And then a week, 2 weeks later, the governor comes out and says, well, we have to shut down all eating at restaurants. And then people had made all these investments that they pretty much went to waste. So there was a heavy impact for sure on the service industry. I know there's a small theater right close to me that I can just walk to. They closed down, I think, in June because by then because the wave was pretty big during that time. I thought they were going to open again, but they just shut down permanently right now. So they are not coming back. So you have stories like that, and the worst thing is that most of the people that work in these areas or in the sectors are like low income individuals that are already facing their own issues, and then you're compounding on that. A lot of restaurants are going out of business, so it's been a big blow to small businesses and low income workers because most of these laws were very isolated, like just
Mm-hmm.
focus on them. It's almost like it was just a Target. You got a Target, nobody's social distancing in there.
a,
Target is
a, a
different.
Costco, and that's a good point that
Yeah.
you're making. We talked a little bit about the education system and the businesses, and closely coupled to that is another area that I've seen some writings from you on is the whole area of childcare, and maybe and even in the context of how it relates to businesses and schools, maybe you can share with our audience some of your thoughts about the challenges in childcare area. And just as importantly, what we always want to do is talk about potential solutions to these challenges. So can you touch on that briefly for our audience, please?
Yes, so childcare, interestingly, was one of the issues that I just started writing on when I first came to the center. So it's
Mhm.
a pretty big issue actually when we look at it. So childcare it's basically just very expensive, and it's also very hard to find. So, to explain it much simpler, so the thing is, you have the big licensed daycare centers. So these are the ones that take like 100 kids at a time, and then you have the family childcare providers. So these are the ones that practice in their homes. So they take like 10, 12 kids at a time, and it's just maybe one person taking care of all these kids. So what has happened in recent years is that those family childcare providers have been going out of business, for numerous reasons. But in the Twin Cities, when they're being replaced by the licensed daycare centers, but those ones are actually not suitable for Greater Minnesota because one, that they require a lot of students. They need to fill out the center just to recoup their investment. So Greater Minnesota doesn't have as much kids. It's not as dense as the Twin Cities, and also it just requires high tuition. So parents in Greater Minnesota cannot afford daycare centers. So what you find is that in the Twin Cities you have the daycare centers, but they cost so high. But even in the low income areas in the Twin Cities, you don't even have the daycare centers. And then in greater Minnesota, you have these childcare visits where you have like 3, 4 kids per one slot of childcare available. So parents have been having a hard time even before the pandemic. And then the pandemic came, and then a lot of providers had to close. They had to take in fewer kids because of all these rules that they had to follow. So some of them closed. Some of them actually survived probably because of the grants that they were given. So this is an issue that is going to get worse potentially in the near future. So a lot of has been done by the state of Minnesota, but most of it has focused on increasing funding, expanding subsidies. But one of the issues that actually hasn't been focused on as much is regulation. Childcare providers are heavily regulated. In Minnesota, you have all these strict standards about crowd staff ratio, and then you have
Mm-hmm.
all these requirements for teachers. They have to have a bachelor's degree. They have to
Right,
have
right.
many hours of training, some of which are not even directly related to them taking care of kids. And then you have all these rules applied consistently, sometimes punitively. These stories about providers getting written down because maybe their water was like 1 degree over the required water temperature. And then you have people getting written up for things like prickly glass. So the issue with regulation is it's pretty huge actually. There's these reports that come out by the task force that the Congress created, and they outline all these issues year by year. But most of the times, they always focus their solutions on funding, which makes it the problem much worse as far as cost is concerned, but doesn't really bring in more suppliers into the market.
Right, right. Well, that's a very good point you make about the regulation. In fact, you've motivated me to go out and look up some information on that. What about, and once again, that's the host, I can bring up these ideas. What about the idea of, and something I think about every once in a while, and I don't know the economic feasibility of it, but what if we looked at public education starting with child infancy instead of 4 years old of kindergarten? Why don't we just expand it?
Yeah.
Has that idea been tossed around within the circles of economics and things like that? And what's been the result of an idea like that?
Do you mean like universal childcare?
Well, I would say look at child care as part of the public school system.
Well,
And does that make sense? But that's one of the things that I've thought about at time. Why don't we just make
yeah.
it part of public education and
Well,
and, and,
I
a,
guess
and
I
approach
guess
from that angle?
I guess that the proposal that comes close to that would be like universal childcare, maybe.
Right, right, right. But it's
Yeah,
still a separate entity. It's not like I send my child to school. We use property taxes and things to pay for it. This is just part of it. In fact, to be honest with you, I even looking back on it, if I was a little smarter, I guess, and maybe it's a good thing I wasn't, I might have even started educating my children while they were in the womb, like they talk about playing Beethoven and reciting numbers and things to them. But my point is that we've talked a lot about early childhood learning. Why not look at learning and public education begin in infancy rather than at 4 years old? And I know some people are going to start talking about socialization skills and things like that, but seemed like to me that would be one of the options. Anyway, has that been talked about in any circles, in insane circles?
I guess sort of. People have shown these proposals of like just making, just introducing maybe public daycare centers or just making
Oh,
child
that's
care
it.
university or something like that. Yeah,
Right.
but the issue with that is like, I think you even with like you've seen with like the public school system,
Yeah,
parents.
yeah, that's a good point.
There's going to be some. So
Yeah.
actually, they did this study in Canada where I think they had universal childcare, but what they found out was like a month later, kids were developing issues with like behavioral issues. So I think parents like the flexibility that comes with private
Yeah,
providers
yeah, yeah.
because
Bad idea there, in other words. You put that very, very politely. So I think I've seen some writings from you on the future job market in Minnesota. Am I correct on that, Martha?
Well, so I do some work on Minnesota's economy and how it's doing. So yeah,
Mhm.
I touch a little bit on how, yeah, our jobs are doing. Uh, so I mean, I mean, we just had a report in like 2 months ago on Minnesota's economy for 2019. So we
Mhm.
touched on, things like productivity and the fact that our job participation rate, labor force participation rate, is going down, has been going down in recent years. It'll probably be going down to up until, there's a report further back that estimated up to 2050 that, participation rate will be going down, which means that as a state we have to look through other ways to increase our productivity, because what we see is that our incomes are high because we have more people working compared to other states, but our productivity numbers are very concerning. So
Mhm.
there's a couple of things that we need to do just so we can produce at similar levels as our other states. So that's
Okay.
the areas we go. Yeah.
Okay. And so, Martha, just a heads up here. You probably have to eat supper here shortly, and I'm going to start winding down here. Uh, you mentioned the job rates and everything, the economy. Uh, I think the last I saw, well, I heard the average income a person moving out of Minnesota is in the $200,000 range, and the average income of the people moving into Minnesota is around the $37,000 range. Have you heard figures like that? And have it been discussed? And is there some concern somewhere that we are, might not even be a word, I have to look up Scrabble. We are impoveritizing Minnesota in a way?
Yeah, so yeah, there's a lot of numbers showing our outward immigration. So we've written at the center a lot about this. So what we've seen in recent years is that our high income, high skilled earners are moving out at a higher rate than at a higher rate, and then we're getting also more low income, low skilled workers. It might be maybe because of our, warfare, that more low income people are coming in, or it could also be because our economy is developing more service jobs. These are
Mhm, mhm,
jobs that pay lower than the average. Uh, when it comes to the people moving out, the theory is that high taxes are a contributing factor, and
mhm,
also when you actually survey people, one of the things that they say has led to them moving is that they're looking for job opportunities in other states, which means that Minnesota is not creating uh, more job opportunities as it should, at least compared to other states. But more recently, at least with more remote, remote work, I think it's going to be easier for Minnesotans that don't like our high property taxes or income taxes to just move, and then they'll be working from wherever they are. Target, was that was that Target or one of those corporations that just moved out of downtown,
yeah, mhm.
Minneapolis. So we probably will see a lot of that, and that's also one of the big issues affecting our productivity in the state.
Okay. And then one of the biggest challenges is, I think the last I heard, the budget deficit, state budget deficit, is projected, the number I heard, to be a minus $1.8 billion. And I don't know how close that is, how correct that is. But the bottom line is that whatever that figure is, we're going to have to somehow make up those revenues. And has there been discussion about making up those revenues and getting us back
So,
on even ground? Go ahead. Uh-huh.
yeah, so there's actually been a lot of updates about the
Okay.
forecast. So so last year, that's when they had projected the deficit. So the November forecast, they had the deficit, but then when the no, actually, the May focus had a deficit, but then the focus came out in November, the deficit for the 2021 year had actually gone, so it was just going to be a
Oh.
normal year. And it came the February forecast for this year. Actually, we have a surplus for this year, and we
Mm.
also have a surplus for the next biennium. It's like $1.6 billion. But it's actually pretty surprising that they're still trying to raise taxes when you have a surplus and you have money coming in from the federal government. So it doesn't make a lot of sense. But as far as our tax revenues are concerned, we're in a pretty good shape. We're doing much better than they expected. They actually just announced, I wrote this blog today that in February and March they collected 20% more revenue than they forecasted, which means that the surplus will even go higher, probably.
So for those of us who are not economists, we look at the fact that businesses are closing and closed, and they've been impacted negatively in a lot of ways. We look at the fact that a lot of individuals are not generating income. They're living off of PPP or whatever you call that, checks and things like. How do you explain the fact that with the job losses, the business closing, people not working, that we're actually showing a surplus in revenues, Martha?
Yeah, so one thing that happened with the job losses was that it was very concentrated among low income individuals. So
Okay.
these are people that don't normally pay a lot in income
Yeah.
taxes or
Yeah.
anything
Yeah.
like that. There wasn't a big blow to the tax revenue, but as of late, people are spending more because the stimulus and just credit card
Right.
spending. So all of that has also contributed to the higher revenues. But even if that hadn't happened, the fact that most of these job losses were just amongst low income workers means that we wouldn't have had like a big blow to our revenues anyway, regardless.
Right. Okay. And I promised them I'm gonna get you. So how do you explain the big demand in the and I guess in the whole real estate industry where houses are selling like hotcakes and now it's time to sell and expensive homes are selling, and maybe this has to do with the fact that a lot of the negative impact was not at the higher income level and things like that. How do you explain the activity in the real estate market where it's really a seller's market and homes are just flying off the market?
Yeah, well, I probably need to read much more on
Okay, that's a
that.
good
Yeah,
answer. Well,
yeah,
look,
that could be a factor. The fact that most people that usually are in the market for a home didn't get impacted. But
okay,
there's also the thing with the interest rates. They're pretty low right now. So people, like, the demand is high actually. So what you see is like the demand is higher than the supply, which is why the prices are so high. So it
okay,
could be a lot of things.
okay. Well, that's a good place to end it at, Martha. And that's going to be your homework because we probably going to one of the days have lunch together. And I'm going to start probably with that question and we'll continue to discuss. So, really appreciate you taking out time here. Do you ever eat grits? Have you ever eaten grits? Are you still
Uh,
eating grits, Martha?
no, I do not, unfortunately. Yeah, I
I'm,
couldn't keep that on. So
I'm disappointed in you.
I apologize.
No, no. Okay, well, thank you very much again for
All right,
taking out
thanks for
time
having
and sharing your knowledge with us and all the great things you've done. And I told you, I always ask all my guests if there's someone out in the audience that's looking to become an economist and that's interested in research in economics and how it impact disadvantaged communities. Give them an idea of what they need to do and how you got where you are and the type of hard work and discipline that it took and why it's so rewarding, Martha.
Yeah. Well, I think that the biggest thing is just to have the passion and to actually want to do research and be very interested in reading. I think that's one of the big things, and also be very open minded because there's a lot of things that I've had to change my mind on during this journey. Things that appeared much more differently than if you ask me 10 years ago, like, should we have like a minimum wage? I'd be like, yeah, why not? People need to be paid more. But once you look into the economics of it, that's a very different. So be open to receiving different information, different point of views, being able to research. Look actually for yourself what actually is going on in the market or the economy. Yeah. So.
Yeah, that's an excellent point to end it on. Look for yourself, and whether it's economics or any other fields, because just like you and I, the more we look for ourselves, the more our perspective and our answers and solutions change. In fact, we'll find out a lot of times that we are 180 degrees opposite of what really works. And so I really appreciate that. Look forward to talking to you again. And like I said, look forward to eventually having lunch with you and sitting down talking. So thanks very much, Martha. You have a great evening, and we're forever appreciative of you being on the show.
All right, thank you for
All
having
right.
me. Have a good
Good
evening.
night. Okay, thank you.